So am I the only one who feels like Ryan Murphy did all of this stuff this year just so he can have multiple different openings for American Horror Story? That seems really reasonable, right? You know what? On a scale of 1 to 10 in head explosions, this episode gets a 10. So everyone is getting pregnant. That is interesting. Okay, so this episode begins very quickly in 1954 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Trying to get everything ready, we get a very fantastic needle drop of a Dean Martin song, which I'm always a fan of. I love Dean Martin. If you don't listen to his music, you really should. From there, we have the housewife, who we then later learn her name is Maria. Her son, Timmy, is in the front yard, literally riding around on his little tricycle bike thing, despite the fact that multiple tornadoes are coming directly towards him, and he's just like, hey, look, Mom, yeah, cool. Dumbass. Timmy. I swear, I don't know exactly what they deal with in New Mexico, but growing up in Texas, if there was a tornado warnings, heck, if there was a tornado outside and my kid was just completely ignoring it, I would take that kid back into the house and beat him silly. Just saying. It's safer that way. Anyway, despite all of that danger and her child literally telling her that, hey, look, there's this huge dangerous thing outside, she does absolutely nothing and allows her child to ultimately get abducted by the aliens. One of the things I really like is the callback to American Horror Story Asylum, where you have the abduction literally pulling someone to the roof before falling back on the floor, because you can't abduct somebody unless it was literally an open space, like we saw later in the episode. From there, Maria's husband comes back not only to find that dinner hasn't been made, but he has a fresh dose of head explosions waiting for him when he gets home. What was that? I'm not good on this camera stuff right now. Never really was. Trying to get used to it for these reviews and other things in the future. But I just had eye surgery, for anyone who's wondering where my glasses went, so there's that. Anyway, from there we're quickly introduced to President Eisenhower, who's interrupted from his golf game in order to go check out the crash landing alien site that we saw in all the trailers. And again, American Horror Story, Ryan Murphy and Sarah Paulson really like to throw in our face that Sarah Paulson can literally do anything that she wants, and that she can play any character despite your preconceived notions about what she can do and who she is. When we get to the crash site, they go out of their way to hide the reveal, even though they knew that they were going to give it away in all the trailers, so who really cares at this point? The big takeaway is that they find Amelia Earhart, played by Lily Rabe, which is probably going to be a better use of Lily Rabe than the first part of American Horror Story double feature with Red Tide. I don't know about you, but I really didn't like Doris. I feel like they didn't do her character any justice, and the fact that she became a pale person so quickly, easily, and so predictably really hurt the season overall, especially with all of that foreshadowing about Lyme disease. Maybe Lyme disease comes back later on this season, but given what we saw in this episode, I don't feel like there's a whole lot of connections happening between Red Tide and Death Valley. Maybe that changes. We'll have to wait and see. Anyway, after a strange interrogation scene in which the President of the United States is talking to Amelia Earhart, someone who's been missing for 20 years at this point, open in a room with her, not knowing exactly who this is or what she's gone through or what kind of mental state that she's in, literally putting the entire national security at risk, which... okay.
But Mr. President, are you sure you want to talk to this woman alone in a room after we found her in an alien crash site? Now listen here. That is a woman, you see. She's not any risk to me or national security, so I'm going to go talk to her in this medical room.
But after they talk, you realize that she doesn't realize where she is, she's missed time, and in fact, she is pregnant, which we haven't gotten any real resolution to at this point. From there, we go into the alien autopsy, filled with more exploding heads before being reintroduced to Maria. That brings even more exploding heads and leaving us on a cliffhanger for a commercial before we jump into present day, in which we're introduced to Kale, Kendall, Troy, and Amy before they start their summer vacation. Now, I have to be honest here. I was really down when it came to this part of the episode. I was really getting into the aesthetic of the 1950s style that they were doing. It was something that they hadn't done in American Horror Story ever. And quite literally, after 10 years and 11 seasons worth of content, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and be interested in whatever they wanted to do, so long as it's new, original, and exciting. And at this point, we haven't gotten a straight period piece from American Horror Story, so straight up abandoning that aesthetic to go into something that was more familiar just kind of felt a little bit off to me. And I really wish that they had lingered more on stuff that was happening, in the past instead of stuff happening in the present. But so long as we're on the scene of them introducing all of the main characters for at least the present day portion of this season, I have to hyper focus on Kaya Gerber's character Kendall and doing her best to earn the Olympic medal for having to hyper explain why characters don't have their phones during a very vital scene in a horror narrative. I'm just saying we're super hyper addicted to phones. Yeah? So? It's taking away all joy in life, and I feel like it's really important that we decide to stop taking our phones everywhere, and maybe we should all leave them everywhere, and that everything is going to be okay if we don't have our phones on us all the time, and that is exactly why we should leave our phones. I don't know if Kendall's character's aversion to technology is going to come back later this season. We can talk about it in the comments, but to me it feels like a really one and done situation. One of the reasons why they really couldn't call for help, they had to run for help, and then just generally didn't have their phones when they really needed them. And even quite frankly, if all of that was set up just for them to leave their phones, it didn't really matter in the long run. They go to Death Valley, they have a good first day before getting to a killing ground of all the cattle who have been sliced in half despite having no blood on the scene, and they're still mooing. They get everything packed up and they're driving away before the aliens come and abduct them. That would be crazy in and of itself if the episode didn't hyper focus on why Jamie was going to get pregnant immediately, not only with Amelia Earhart's pregnancy that is yet to be explained, but also her aversion to, that was introduced earlier on in the episode. But given that shock revelation was pretty blatant on its face based off of everything else that we had seen in this episode, I was still hoping for something more akin for American Horror Story, and based off of some of the trailers that we've gotten for this part of the season, generally a more interesting concept. Not just Jamie being pregnant, but all four of them, girls and boys included. And quite frankly, while we're on the topic, Kendall just has to be one of the funniest characters introduced in American Horror Story in its entire run. I mean, she's skeptical at first about her own pregnancy, even though she admits that it's possible, but then she immediately jumps into pregnancy not only for her and Jamie, but also the boys. Oh, I don't feel so good. Maybe we cooked things wrong when we went on a camping trip. Oh my God. An alien made you pregnant. So yeah, all jokes aside, good episode. I mean, I was a little bit disappointed with the finale of Red Tide, knowing that, Death Valley was not going to be the savior of that part of the season. We got 5 fantastic episodes, followed by a very typical Ryan Murphy-esque finale for American Horror Story. This is something right now that all fans just absolutely know is a possibility, or maybe a likelihood with every single season of American Horror Story, or maybe even a Ryan Murphy type of project. You can create something very interesting and unique, but ending it is always going to be a little bit hard. That's one of the reasons I like American Horror Story Asylum so much. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was good enough, especially after everything that had happened in that season. I felt like everyone deserved a little bit of a happy ending, and that's exactly what we got. With this, I'm not entirely sure. I'm expecting 3 very good episodes before a very disappointing finale. All in all, it's still a really good season thus far. I just hope we focus more on the 1950s aesthetic, because that is the most interesting stuff going on. And quite literally, based off of all the talent that we've seen in both parts of the story, I'm just really wanting to focus more on that time period, because those are the more staples of American Horror Story. That's just me though. Tell me what your thoughts and opinions about this episode are in the comments section. I hope everyone is having a fantastic day. It's been real.